Also, one of the problems with functional freeze is that there's usually an element of fear in your daily life.
Mhm.
And so this made me think like, if your husband always yells at you when he comes in the door or something like that, you're always having this subconscious undercurrent of
Mhm.
fear. So the bottom line is fear can change the chemistry in our brain. It affects our nervous system. Affects our endocrine system, and it can cripple our motivation.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Butterfly Event Podcast. I'm your host, Heather Hewitt, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for episode 10. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and often misunderstood topic called functional freeze. I'm going to be joined by my amazing co host, Martha Charneski, and she in particular is going to be shedding light on the science behind this particular state. We'll explore what functional freeze really means, how it affects us, and most importantly, what strategies can help us support someone navigating through this challenging experience. So, whether you're tuning in for personal insight or looking to support a loved one, you won't want to miss this episode. Let's spread our wings and get started. Martha, I'm so excited about this episode. I cannot wait to hear, what you have to break down around this. This is so important. I have so many clients that have gone through functional freeze as well as myself, so I can't wait to hear about it. But this episode is all about functional freeze, feeling stuck, how to get moving, and we're going to talk about a few reasons why we go through this, some practical ways to move forward, and then, especially from that next level of feeling stuck, which is sometimes referred to as functional freeze. So let's start on a positive note. What is the opposite of feeling stuck? Of course, that would be feeling energized, accomplishing things, being productive, making goals, following through, buying a day timer, actually using it, showering earlier in the day. I love showers, it wakes me up. Exercising on a regular basis, especially one that's appropriate to your limitations and not going over the top. And if we were all at this level of daily success, what would life be like? Well, the reality of life is unforeseen things happen. There's ups and downs. Martha, do you care to, give it your thoughts on this?
Well, I got nothing for you, Heather. No, I'm just kidding.
That would ruin the whole thing.
I know. And I want to add, we tried to record this episode before and somehow it didn't work, but we're both kind of grateful that it didn't because of other things that have
Yes,
happened.
yes, because we got a better platform now, which is, Riverside, which is supposed to be the best. So I'm excited about it. It's
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah. So, back to your point, yes, we go through phases in our life of feeling stuck, and I believe we do all have potential. We all have gifts that we can use to make our lives better and really make the world a better place. But sometimes things interfere, and I was thinking about that John Lennon quote. Life happens when you're busy making other plans. So,
Hmm.
some days feel like a battle just to get one thing done. And I think we've all been there. And we have to accept those days and give ourselves grace because they do happen. Sometimes
Hmm.
we're just very low energy. Then there's those days we're in the flow, but then we could be in the middle of a project and negative thoughts creep in or negative emotions that disrupt our momentum. So, one of those things that can disrupt us is a lingering limiting belief that we've held on to
Hmm.
that we need to really get out of our mind, work on slaying that dragon, so to speak. But we also could have days when we feel self-pity, and this isn't a pity pod, this is a podcast. So, you know, we're trying to help people move out of that. And, because life doesn't always go the way we want it to. I mean, in
Hmm.
fact, 90% of the time, unexpected things occur.
Yeah.
So we want to clear our lens so it's not distorted on how we view our life, and then we can take more practical steps to get moving, you know, and really change the things that make us feel stuck. So I wanted to say also, I appreciate you, Heather, because you are working so hard to find ways to break these old patterns and really for us to make changes in our life. And I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Martha. And I appreciate you for being by my side doing this. I just feel for people, just like you do. We have this empathy because we've gone through this. We know how difficult it is, and there is a way out. And that's why I love this podcast, our platform here. It's the butterfly event. And when you think about a caterpillar, they have 100% of that potential inside itself to transform, as we all do, and everyone listening to this podcast. So, for this week, we're going to discuss some of the symptoms of what psychologists call functional freeze. And even though this is not maybe considered a medical diagnosis generally, it should be, because there are the physiological changes in the brain and endocrine system, but that contribute to feeling stuck and just staying there. And we hear so many people say, I feel stuck. And what are some reasons, Martha, you think people go through phases of feeling stuck?
Well, there's so many, but just we won't go into all of them. But a few of the really common ones is, like I mentioned, limiting beliefs, and sometimes these are so strong that we have to actually pause our life and do the work to break free of these things. And maybe we have to realize when we're in the flow and then that thought comes in that's interrupting us,
Mm-hmm.
jot it down real quick and say, you know what, I need to get this out of my system. Start saying the opposite, and that can kind of break the spell, and give yourself a pep talk. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm a believer in that because sometimes you don't have a cheerleading squad around you to get you through those moments. So you have to do it yourself. The other thing is we have to change the story that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
This can be a real catalyst for change that affects the total trajectory of our life. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we're telling ourselves the story of being a victim and all these things, then our
Yep.
mentality isn't rising above that, and you can go from victim to victor, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
our goal is, the other thing is sometimes our self-expression is stunted. We stop growing, mentally, emotionally. We're not feeding those needs, and we all have a need to continue to grow and develop. We're
Mm-hmm.
not, none of us are perfect. We're not going to be perfect, I'll say, in this system, you know but where our focus goes, our energy flows. So sometimes we just can buy out a few minutes each day to do something that makes us feel more purposeful. And this is going to sound goofy, but sometimes we can look in the mirror and, because we're not in a position to make big changes in our life, we have family and work and all these other things, but we can say, I'm doing what I can right now, and this is good. It's important. I'm serving my needs. I'm helping my family, because that way we can still feel content. We don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
we have to
Yes,
start throwing our life away to make these changes.
that's right.
Sometimes these are small changes that can impact us in a big way. Um, One of the things, the other factor, and I was just going to talk about this really quickly, is sometimes we're in a situation where we're emotionally kind of oppressed. Like maybe we're living with someone who's negative or critical. And what we can do is set internal boundaries in those situations. Because really, what we say and do isn't going to change that person, but we can decide for ourselves, I'm going to make the best of this situation. And that's when you have your alone time to do things that are important to you, and you can move past these. And it starts by changing our attitude. And
Mm-hmm.
Heather, this made me think of the cognitive triangle. And I don't know if you wouldn't mind explaining what the cognitive triangle is for our listeners who might not be familiar with it.
Sure. It's basically a conceptual triangle showing how the things going on in our lives are interconnected. If we picture each angle of the triangle being assigned a quality, one is behaviors, one is thoughts, and one is feelings. If any of these angles change, the other two inevitably will be affected. This is where the idea to be the change has real significance.
Yes, exactly. I agree. So that's where the making small changes every day can make a big difference. So sometimes it really is our attitude about something that becomes more difficult when feelings of fear or lack of control are involved.
Yeah. So what do you think functional freeze would look like for those that aren't familiar with this term? Because I know quite a number of people aren't.
Okay, that's a really good question. So, functional freeze is different from feeling temporarily stuck. It feels more like something's overriding your nervous system. So, it can actually involve gradual physiological changes in our mind and body. And a person in real functional freeze would get through their day. They might get the necessary tasks done, get the kids off to school, but they have really no heartfelt motivation. They actually have no aspirations. They've kind of set their life on hold and they don't have a lot of enjoyment in their life. So, a telltale sign of the difference between feeling stuck and functional freeze is when self care kind of goes out the window.
Hmm.
So, a person in functional freeze, if they brush their teeth once a day, that's like a win, you know?
Hmm.
And it's a real thing. It's a real thing. I've seen people make videos all about their life of not taking a shower for 3 days, and these things they
Hmm.
don't realize they're in functional freeze. I
Right.
almost should comment on their posts, but just to reassure our listeners, I've had this at least twice in my life, and I'll say
Hmm.
through God's mercy and having a good doctor, I was able to overcome it. So, Heather, I know you've been through similar experiences where,
Yeah.
a diagnosis is missed, but our brain and body are very complex. So, sometimes we're forced to find a way to deal with these complex challenges, and we have to do the research on the science behind it. So, there's no medical treatment for functional freeze, and partly because three systems of the body are involved, that we'll talk about a little extensively, but it's definitely treatable. And I think changing our diet and lifestyle habits can really impact this. Science has gone a long way since I had it the first time because I was pretty young. But now we want to share the tools that we've learned, to help people deal with this functional freeze and take
Hmm.
some like actionable steps that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, too. So,
Exactly. I think it was very important the way you broke it down. I think in the medical establishment, when I think back to when I was in that state and I didn't know it and thought it was just depression. And I'm saying just depression because depression is a symptom of it. There's many other symptoms. And so I remember going to the psychiatrist several times and they put you on antidepressants. And that's fine. I mean, that's their go to, but it didn't work for me. And I believe it's because they're just hitting one element of it. And what happens is it makes you feel more defeated, more discouraged when it doesn't work. You keep going back in, they keep switching medications, it doesn't work. And it's because it's not addressing the underlying issues that we're talking about. So we really wanted to help our listeners in practical ways. I mean, I definitely agree. Eating habits is key, even though when you're in that state, you really don't care. I mean, that's where I was. I just didn't care. And I ended up picking up and going to hyper palatable, ultra processed foods because it would make me feel something, because of the catecholamine's cocktail that you are experiencing, of dopamine and cortisol and epinephrine. And that's what I was feeling all the time when I ate that. And of course, what we would need to do is cut out ultra processed foods, which are going to improve your mood, because when you get this floodgate or fire hose of dopamine, cortisol, epinephrine, endocannabinoid, and opiates, and serotonin, our receptors in our brain downregulate. And when that happens, of course, what goes up must come down. We get more depressed, is what happens. And then now it's also affecting our gut microbiome. And that is where 90% of serotonin is made. So it's like I felt like a hamster on a hamster wheel. Just it was horrible. It's horrible. So I'm so glad we're doing this because there are also key emotional factors that are involved in functional freeze. It's complex and there are so many different components to it. And we're really trying to help people identify and try to make a difference. So how can people identify and start turning things around, Martha?
Well, that's a good question. And thank you for sharing your experience because I think a lot of people can relate to what you're saying. We turn to easy avenues for food because we don't have the energy to make a really well,
Yeah.
a healthy meal. Um,
Yep.
or you have little kids, you're just kind of like getting whatever you can out there. The other thing is, like you mentioned, our brain is always trying to reach homeostasis. So,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, what comes up must come down because we're supposed to, we need joy in our life. That's one
Yes.
factor. That's a key emotion that we're living without when we're in functional freeze. And our body, our heart is involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's the things we focus our attention on that are draining our joy. So, I know for you and I, we turn to the Bible at times because we feel like this is definitely going to lift our spirits. So
Yes.
sometimes that's just one practical thing to turn it around. Obviously, some days are better than others, and it does depend on our food intake because our gut, that factor is a long-term thing. We're
Yes.
constantly fermenting things. We're creating, the precursors to the neurotransmitters in our gut. So foods are such a key element in this. And
Yes.
that's when you can do your own research. But, we all know what a healthy diet is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just focusing on that a little bit more attention. Um,
Yes.
Also, one of the problems with functional freeze is that there's usually an element of fear in your daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And so this made me think like, if your husband always yells at you when he comes in the door or something like that, you're always having this subconscious undercurrent of
Mm-hmm.
fear. So the bottom line is fear can change the chemistry in our brain. It affects our nervous system, affects our endocrine system, and it can cripple our motivation.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Because I know in my experience, healthcare professionals don't diagnose this. What about your experience with that?
Um, Well, it depends on the scope of, I'll say, the current knowledge that's out there. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's now becoming people are asking, "Do I have this?" So it's
Right.
forcing more of an investigation on this.
That's true.
I think a therapist might recognize it. They
Mm-hmm.
may not exactly know, the science behind the neurotransmitters. It can mask as chronic anxiety and depression,
Right.
as you mentioned, or chronic stress. If you go to the doctor, they're going to say, well, you have chronic stress. But sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
don't even really have it. You're just going through your life and you're thinking, but where's my stress? So
Mm-hmm.
kind of the damage has been done. So this is where you kind of have to reverse it. If you have sinus issues all the time, reflux, other things, they can be related to functional freeze because your cortisol level has been just cortisol spouting all the time when you're afraid. Your adrenal function has to be reduced because it's not getting time to rest. You're not sleeping deeply. So this all affects your nervous system. We're kind of using the latest science, but even what we have today, they're going to have more information in 2 weeks. So we try to keep on top of it and provide awareness. So that's where we're at today.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I laugh because that is so true.
True.
Um, and and depending on which way that you look at it, there's also something called dorsal vagal shutdown, which is the same thing from the nervous system perspective. And actually, part two to this, that in a couple weeks, we're going to break that down and give it from a different perspective. And what we're trying to do is be as comprehensive as possible because we want people to be able to relate to this experience somehow. And us giving it from different perspectives helps people from all over all different places and different types of learning really feel like they can relate to this experience. So I'm gonna be breaking down that a bit more. But why do you think, in your experience, this happens to many of us?
Well, one reason, and also I did glance at your notes about the dorsal vagal. That's going to be awesome. So I looked at that. It's really interesting science behind that too. Um, Back to your question. One reason is because people are living for a long duration, months or even years,
Mm-hmm.
under a stressful
Yep.
situation that they've decided somehow is normal. It's like
Yes.
you're kind of like, this is normal now. This is the new normal. Think of COVID.
Yeah.
Those were years of people probably in functional freeze. They were afraid to, not
Mm.
wash their groceries. Like there was so many things to think
True.
about, and it was
True.
exhausting for our nervous system.
Yes.
Um, Another example, just a common thing I'll say, is being a caregiver, maybe for an elderly
Mm-hmm.
parent for an extended period of time. You basically put your needs on a shelf. You have to take
Yes.
care of your husband's needs or your children, and then take care of an elderly parent. And maybe you're afraid they have a health condition, they could die, or if they don't answer the phone, you're freaking out. These are real
Right.
factors I've done with my mom and my dad. So we don't want to put our self-care on hold for very
Right.
long. I mean, even, maybe temporary, but really we don't want to.
Yes. And I just had this question, wouldn't you kind of say too, in general, women might experience this a bit more because of the caregiving that we do, be it a parent, even a spouse, children, grandchildren? We're kind of always caregiving, caregiving, caregiving. Seems
Uh,
nonstop.
100%. And this world
Yeah.
is a dangerous place. So if you have little kids, you're out in public, you're always worried where they're at.
Yes.
Like there's
Yeah.
a siren going off in your head if you don't see your
True.
kid for 2 seconds, or your
That's true.
grandchild. So there's a wave of fear that comes across us. It is,
Yeah.
it can be crippling, you know.
Yes.
So you're right. Women have to deal with this. We're made different. We're
Hmm.
like, I feel like God made us so amazing that we can have a child, for one thing. Men freak out at, you know, if they have a cold, I think it's a national holiday, in our
Right.
house. I'm kidding. My husband's great, but I'm just saying women are built differently, and they
Yeah, for
handle
sure.
things. They can handle multiple things and still get things done, still show the love usually,
Yes,
but we do have a tipping point.
that's right.
Everyone does.
That's
So
right.
the other example I just wanted to bring out is a lot of people I see online, they're living with narcissists. And
Yes.
this can be a very unhealthy emotional situation.
Hmm.
It could be your mate, it could be a sibling, it could be your parents, a demanding boss that's just controlling and
Hmm.
easily triggered. One of the things, if you have a highly sensitive nervous system, you might
Hmm.
be a people pleaser. And, if you live with a narcissist, it's going to take a long time to realize they're never satisfied. They're always
Hmm.
disappointed. So it's not you. And that's, we've talked about this in other podcasts. So don't forget, whatever you're doing, however you're living your life, you're worthy of having your own needs met. And sometimes you just have to do that for yourself. You have to
Hmm.
take over, don't let someone own all your time, you know. And if there's an ongoing situation with this feeling of fear and overwhelm for too long, it is the recipe for functional freeze.
Yes. Oh, beautifully said. I'm hoping this is resonating with people because as you're talking, I'm thinking back to my experiences and I just didn't see things leading up to that. Now that we've been through it and now we know what leads up to it, we can be proactive and making sure we get that self care in that we need. And you're right, fear is supposed to be a temporary emotion. It's useful, but not staying there every day, day in and day out. I mean, we need it to activate the nervous system. It springs us into action. It keeps us safe. But when it's ongoing, it's insidious. It can do a lot of damage, draining the system, causing fatigue, contributing to excess cortisol, poor memory function, and a lack of sleep. And we can think we're being lazy, but that's actually the nervous system is being shut down by fear.
Right. That's why I say it's crippling. Fear is crippling.
Yeah.
It just made me think of a scripture. It says love throws fear outside.
Yeah.
So
That's
sometimes when
beautiful.
you have like that motivation of love, I feel like then you do change your perspective and fear is not the initial element.
Yes.
So, but it's all true with functional freeze. Going for a walk could feel like, a huge, like you're going to climb Mount Everest, because you're
Yes.
just so
Yes.
so exhausted, and
Seriously.
so depleted. And really, the other thing we want, fear can take joy out of your heart, which we've talked a little bit about.
Yes.
So, this is all related to the nervous system and the prefrontal cortex, and more precisely, the low dopamine or low norepinephrine levels. So,
Mm-hmm.
some of these people don't realize that even restless leg syndrome is actually a sign that your
Yes.
dopamine is low. A lot of
Yes.
people think, well, I need magnesium, but they're not, you need magnesium, but you also
Right.
need dopamine,
That's right.
and your system needs to provide that. So our body's trying to alert us, but we don't always get the message.
Right.
So the dopamine receptors in the prefrontal cortex, if this goes on for too long, can actually shut down. And this is true if the diet and nutrient intake fail to support these systems. So,
Yes. Well said. Because, for instance, when you were talking about that, I had this memory come back of when I was eating a lot of ultra processed foods when I was in this state. And at night, I would get restless leg really bad. And that's because your dopamine spikes so high when you're eating that your receptors downregulate, and now you're not taking the extra dopamine that's just free floating around in your system, and you're not absorbing it. And then I would feel depressed or anxious or irritable in the evening. It was like a vicious cycle. So that's so true. It's so hard. So, Martha, you mentioned the prefrontal cortex, and this is where executive function, decision making, and motivation, emotions are processed. And when these dopamine receptors are shut down, this explains why joy and motivation are such a struggle. And dopamine is that pleasure hormone, and you don't feel pleasure in things that you used to. I remember that. I was like, what is wrong with me? I don't even want to do such and such like I normally do. That's who I am. What is going on? So how important are these receptors, and in your experience, what can we do to activate them?
yeah. So that's a really important question, Heather. One of the things you said about the dopamine not, so when these synapses aren't working in those receptors, the dopamine literally just dumps into this one area of the brain called the periaqueductal gray. So literally you're just wasting your dopamine, you know?
Yes.
So what I'll just share an example of how important dopamine receptors are. So it's, as we know, dopamine's a neurotransmitter and it's vital for what you were saying, motivation, following through on decisions. That's also one thing that we're not able to do. So,
Yeah.
and this is all taking place at the prefrontal cortex. So, there's an enzyme called dopamine beta hydroxylase, and this is needed to convert dopamine into norepinephrine. So, our adrenals do support this, but it also is happening in the brain and in the gut.
Hmm.
Okay. So, without dopamine or this dopamine beta hydroxylase, so that norepinephrine drops too low. And these neurotransmitters are markers for depression.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're not both taken into consideration when medications
Right.
are given. So, like you were mentioning, it's like they keep adding things,
Hmm.
changing things, and it's not really addressing all the issues.
Right.
One more example, and this just is something people have heard about or know a little bit about, is Parkinson's disease. And
Hmm.
this is a debilitating disease. And with Parkinson's, it's the midbrain dopamine 1 and 2 receptors that are shut down.
Yes.
This affects movement, pain tolerance, dementia, can cause tremors, balance issues, cognitive function issues, sleep, mood, can even lead
Hmm.
to incontinence and other bodily functions that are not functioning properly, because the
Right.
midbrain is actually the motor cortex. So this
Yeah.
is a little bit different, but with functional freeze, the D2 receptors in the prefrontal cortex are shut down. So it can
Yes.
feel almost like something physical is sabotaging your efforts to perform a simple task, like taking a shower, brushing your teeth, going for a walk. We mentioned that it masks depression. And
Hmm.
from personal experience, I can say the struggle is real, you know. So if we think about our prefrontal cortex processes most emotions, and norepinephrine is activates the sympathetic nervous system.
Hmm.
The adrenals help with this, and to one degree or another, these all require certain nutrients and precursors or building blocks to remain at healthy levels. So food choices, including a variety of healthy fruits and vegetables, can have a huge impact on our health. This is one reason, there's other nutrients, but one of the things that I've learned from this, especially in my more recent episode, was that I was low on choline. And you can find foods that have choline in them. Basically, the liver converts choline to something called acetylcholine. And this is
Hmm.
what those synapses need to get firing again.
Hmm.
So, but even a healthy liver during times of stress, and I mean,
Yeah.
if you drink alcohol, you eat fatty foods, you're stressing your liver. If you're not sleeping well, your
Right.
liver's not detoxifying at night. So, if you're feeling unmotivated, you can actually find foods that will help increase your choline. So, your acetylcholine in your brain is actually
Yes.
increasing. And that's what we might need at that point. But
Right.
as I think we all have said, this podcast is for information. That's not medical advice, but you
Right.
can do research on changing your own habits, lifestyle habits, and diet.
Yes. Well said, Martha. So, what was your experience like when you developed functional freeze?
It's a nightmare. I don't want to.
I know, right?
He's like, I don't want to relive this, so I'll just sum it up. No, I'm just kidding. The first time I had it was so long ago that doctors did not have any clue what this was, and
Right.
I had gotten so bad that I could barely hold myself up to brush my teeth in the morning.
Yeah.
I went to my family doctor. They said I had fibromyalgia and possibly lupus,
Mhm.
and I was young. They didn't give me any hope for a cure or treatment.
Right.
And you know me, Heather, I'm like, I need an answer. I need a
Me too.
option.
Yeah.
I'm too young to live the rest of my life like
That's
this.
right.
That was my feeling internally. So I remember my brother said to me, Marth, I think you're in a depression or something. You just don't seem happy. You don't enjoy food. You're not interested in life. I feel like he literally just diagnosed functional freeze, but there wasn't that word
Wow.
out there, you know. Um, and I realized I needed help. So
Mhm.
I mentioned to a girl at work, and she said, my daughter went to this holistic doctor. He has a different approach. Maybe you should check it out. I had to wait on a list. I think you've tried to get in there, and he's retiring, unfortunately. But anyway, I finally got in there and I told him, I think my adrenals are burnt out. I feel like something's wrong.
Mhm.
And he ran the tests and he said, definitely you have adrenal fatigue and
Mhm.
beyond. Like it was beyond that. Normal fatigue is one thing, but he said it's been going on too long.
Mhm.
So, to give you an idea of what I was dealing with for too long, I'll just sum up in a long sentence or a couple sentences the stress that I was under. So, I had recently been separated from my first husband, and basically he threatened to kill me. And I'm
Mhm.
going to add the reason why, because we have both started studying the Bible, and I fell in love with what I was learning. He wanted to stop me. We met in college. We were like college sweethearts, and neither one of us were Bible students at the time, but I loved what I was learning, and he wanted me to stop. You know, so he threatened to kill me, and I basically packed my car, and a friend of mine drove with me. I left my two dogs. I left a lot of my great friends, and I moved from California to the Chicago area. And I
Mhm.
needed to put distance between us. But then he started calling me every night, apologizing, trying to get me to move back. And this lasted about 20 months. And because I was so loyal, I really didn't want to end the marriage, but he was literally trying to destroy me. And I don't even think he realized it, you know? So it was affecting my health. And I finally went to that doctor. I implemented his protocol. I changed my eating habits, and I went from barely holding myself up
Wow.
to lifting weights within a month, thanks to, the direction that I followed, and the lifestyle changes that I made.
Wow, Martha. Wow. I am so sorry you went through that. I really am. But I know you, and you're not a quitter. You're someone who's very determined. You have very strong faith in God, rely on Him. He helped you get through it. But I mean, we have to partner with God, and He helps us through things. We can't expect Him to do all the work, and you're not like that. You're a hard worker, determined, and wow. I just so grateful to be friends with you. I hate that you went through it, but now you're able to help other people now. So thank you for sharing that. That was really powerful. And that was a lot of stress. And I'm really glad that you found a good doctor. You didn't quit. You didn't give up. Um, he was able to help you, and that's really important for our listeners to understand that we may go through these things, but we can be helped and reverse symptoms. And as you mentioned, what we're sharing is for information purposes. And you mentioned the endocrine system and the nervous system. How might the nervous system be involved too?
Well, that was kind of the trifecta. So we definitely want to answer that important question. Most people have heard of the vagus nerve, and there's another nerve that's actually closely connected to our emotions and motivation, decision making, and it connects the sensory organs of the face to the prefrontal cortex, and it's called the trigeminal nerve. I think it's getting a little more
Yeah,
acknowledgement lately. People
yeah.
are investigating this, and tri meaning three branches, and geminus meaning twin. So the branches originate above and behind each ear, and they connect the
Hmm.
mouth, the center of the face, and the eyes to the prefrontal cortex. What I found that can affect trigeminal nerve function is that it can be blocked at the jaw or behind
Hmm.
and above the ear or on the sides of the neck. And this can be from stagnant lymph, because we've seen those people do the little lymph tap, where they massage it and get it flowing.
Yes,
This can
yes,
actually get really be blocked. You can sleep on too
yes.
many pillows, or you have your head down looking at a screen all day. A
That's
lot
right.
of things can affect the lymph flow on these areas. The other thing, and this is possibly more common than people realize, is that it can be blocked by childhood trauma.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons that this factor needs to be considered is because a lot of anger, sadness, and feelings of powerlessness are stored in the jaw, and it
Hmm.
can affect this nerve. So doing lymph draining exercises at the jaw and the sides of the neck are especially helpful here. Also, gentle facial massage, neck massage. I do facial massage every month or so, and I lay down, I put oils on, and I massage out the lymph areas, so
Nice.
you can find charts on that. But this improves energy flow to this nerve and to the vagus nerve and the carotid nerve. So
Yes.
the vagus nerve allows energy exchange between the gut and the brain. So this
Hmm.
is really crucial
That's
too.
right.
So each nerve path is important for
Yeah.
parasympathetic and sympathetic energy.
Yes. Well said. The brain and vagus nerve, gut are all best friends. Well, the brain and
We
gut are
want them
best
to be.
friends. Yes. And the vagus nerve is the telephone line, is what it is, how I explain it to
Excellent.
people. And one
Excellent.
of the things that I do, like in my class, as well as at night, I will do this at night, and I normally will yawn, and that parasympathetic gets activated, and I'm able to drift off to sleep.
Excellent.
But it used to, when I first started doing this, it used to hurt on both sides. So I could see what you're saying about that blockage in doing that. Now it doesn't because I do it so often. It doesn't, but it would hurt. So yes, this is definitely, we definitely need to make sure we're working in that area. I also use my what do you call it? The
Oh, like a jade roller or gua sha?
yeah, gua sha. Yes, that's what I do that every. Oh, that feels so good, and I'll get goosebumps, and I do that every night, and that's been great. But I'm so glad you're talking about this because that is so needed. I couldn't believe how tight all in here and in here, carrying stress in the back of my neck and all in this area here. That's crazy.
I agree.
Oh, yeah. So, what else have you found that improves energy to these nerves? Because it's really important for sure.
Right. And I don't think people realize how nerve pathways can be hindered, and I don't
Yeah.
think doctors even investigate this.
No.
But because I basically I do so much research on lymphatic drainage and on the nervous system because when I
Yeah.
went to school to be a massage therapist, you had to learn every muscle. Well, then you had to learn where you couldn't push because there was nerves there, like
Yeah.
highly sensitive areas in the body. And I was like, this is fascinating. So it just made me dig deeper. On these nerves here, there's actually one that goes into the throat. Okay. So
Hmm.
you'll find people that they have throat issues all the time, or they have
Hmm.
tonsil issues, or sinus issues. And one of
Yes.
the problems is that they're not doing proper oral hygiene. I know that
Yeah.
sounds so simple, but
Right.
it's super important. Brushing your teeth. There's nerves in every tooth to every organ of the body. That's what people don't realize. But even if you've, let's say, had your teeth removed or had crowns or root canals, you can still brush the gums gently to get the nerves activated. I know you and we both talked about this. We use electric toothbrushes because the vibration actually stimulates the nerves too. So
Hmm.
this is important. Cleaning, flossing, throat gargling, tongue brushing, all of these reduce unhealthy bacteria that accumulates in the mouth, teeth, tongue, tonsils. So, if you decide to think about this or do something about it and do any throat gargling, because this is the one thing that activates the nerve and helps clear that path. Throat gargling, I would say use a natural product because you're going to possibly end up swallowing a little bit of it.
Right.
Um, you can find things that are 100% natural, made with a few essential oils. Then you can gargle, and that vibration in the back of the throat can help stimulate the prefrontal cortex nerves. Believe it or not, it's so
Yeah. And the
simple,
vagus. Right.
you
And
know.
the vagus nerve too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So you do need to make sure there's not lymph stuck there. Lymph can be blocked here too, so you can look for tender areas, do gentle
Okay.
massage. You don't have to tap yourself or beat yourself up. You know, ge- you know, I'm honestly, you but tap yourself. You don't have to tap yourself. Just move it. You'll feel the tender areas. You'll find it, like you mentioned. If it's real tender, then you're blocked. So you have to
Yes.
work those
Okay.
areas. At one point, and I'm just going to add this because a lot of people don't realize the middle fingers and the ring fingers. The middle fingers are directly attached to your lymphatic system. Okay.
Mm.
And the ring fingers are like love and joy in your
Right.
system. They're
Right. That's
very
why they
tender
do the
and
rings.
gentle.
Yeah. Okay.
So use those two fingers on these points. Believe it or not, it'll drain faster.
So these two
Yep.
right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
you're going to help move the lymph. If you look at a chart that's done very well, you'll see that there's a nerve that goes all the way up to the tip of the middle fingers and it connects
Cool.
all the lymph vessels and nodes. So it's like a
Wow.
positive and negative thing in your body. The way God made us, I'm just going to say,
I
it's
know, right?
it's
Down
so
to just
interesting.
the nerves, down to our fingerprints,
Right.
just down to everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the factors is consistency. You want to do this throat gargling every morning. Otherwise, you're going to realize you're running out of energy and you're not stimulating that if you're in functional freeze or if your low
Yeah.
motivation is too low. So The last point I want to bring out about this is that there's a tonsil on the back of our tongue. A lot of people don't know it. It's called the lingual tonsil. And this tonsil, it can get inflamed with, I'll say, strep A, which we all have strep A.
Right,
Even antibiotics aren't going to clear it out of our system.
right.
There's little pockets that it hides in. Um, but doing these things that I just mentioned about the oral hygiene, that can really reduce this bacteria in our body. And the thing with bacteria is they don't just live there, they produce toxins.
Yeah,
They are living things, so they're producing waste. This is what our body's trying to fight, and this is
right.
one of the things that causes aging. So doing these things, especially among the elderly, because they don't always have really good oral care and facilities. It's hard to get maybe they're missing
Yeah,
teeth.
true,
There's a lot of factors.
true.
So we
Yeah,
want to reduce these bacteria. Otherwise, we can get digestive biofilms that can lead to reflux, swallowing and choking issues. And so that's kind of the last point of that. But the other thing is, if we get gland and neurotransmitter supporting nutrients and minerals into our system, this
yes,
can help keep those dopamine, norepinephrine levels stable. And that way,
hmm,
the dopamine receptors will function optimally during times of stress and as we age.
yes. I love that. That preemptive. That's what I'm all about. Instead of just, oh, it's just life. No, there are things that we can do.
Right.
And we're not looking for perfection, but we're looking to function and just not be stuck in that survival mode all the time. And that is a lot of information, but it's good to know. And it's information, and there's simple things that you gave for people to do, that we can add into our self-care routine. So using those lymph clearing techniques, nutrition, and proper oral hygiene can help, as you mentioned. And doing all those things together is going to be great. And I will experience periods of shutdown, which we're going to get into during the dorsal shutdown, because um, our bodies give us signs before it happens. It really does. And that's one of the things I really am in awe about with God too, is that He put a warning system in us before things happen. And when we were younger, we kind of didn't know what was going on. Those warnings were there and you just don't know, and then it happens. But now that it has happened and it's so ugly and awful, I hated it. To me, it's way worse than, being in that parasympathetic wired up here, which I hate that too. But shut down, that functional freeze, to me is the scariest. When you get to the place you don't care, it is scary. I hate that because it's not me. And it almost feels like you're trapped in your own body and mind, and there's no way out. But we had discussed some practical things that we can do. So, Martha, you did phenomenal job breaking this down and giving us physiological things to do, practical steps, what happens during functional freeze, what to look for. Now, let's say you get into shutdown or functional freeze. What are some somatic exercises we can do? Well, somatic means of the body, having to do with the body. And normally at the end of our podcast, we try to add a somatic exercise or some type of exercise that you can take away from all of this. So if you find yourself in this, you can take a few minutes, starting with doing a few deep breaths in through your nose, out through your nose, or through pursed lips, in through your nose, out through your nose, in through your nose, and out through your nose. And the reason why we want to exhale through our nose or through pursed lips is because when we have the mouth open, we are activating the sympathetic nervous system. And we really don't want to do that, even in functional freeze. We don't want to go from one extreme to the other. When we do that, that hard shift over like that, as I mentioned earlier, what goes up will come down again and we'll go right back into shutdown. What we want to do is move over to parasympathetic. So I'm going to show a couple of exercises that are going to help. And one of them is called body tapping. And what we're doing is encouraging blood and energy flow and stimulation. And what we're doing is we're just stimulating by tapping on our bodies, gentle. We don't want to beat ourselves. As Martha mentioned, I would go from one extreme to the other. I would beat myself. And you can do the inside, outside of your arm, just nice, gentle tapping. This reduces stress, depression, anxiety, down the sides of your body and even on your legs. And with your legs, you can tap both the same time, a nice, gentle tap. I'm feeling my blood flowing doing this for those that are just listening over audio. We're doing a nice, gentle tapping, and you do this up and down until you really start feeling that blood flowing and you feel good. And you might even experience a yawn, a sigh, or a swallow, which means that you are switching over to parasympathetic. Now, another one we can do is called the arm crossed hug. So we take, each hand, left shoulder, right shoulder, until our arms are crossed in front of us like an X for those that are just listening. And we want to raise our arms up. And when we do that, our hands come up and we're just moving up and down our arms. So our hands are gently tapping the other side of our shoulders. And it's called a crossed arm hug. And if we do a few deep breaths as we're doing it, exhale through the nose, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. This is a grounding rhythmic tapping that provides sensory grounding in the here and now and anchors us at the same time. Now, you can do this anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. And at first, when you first start these exercises, you may feel that you need a bit longer time. That's okay. The biggest cheat code in life is consistency. Practicing this every day, being consistent. When you do that, as soon as you go into you're crossing your arms and doing this or whatever, your body will be so used to it, you will automatically do that yawn or swallow or sigh because your brain and body know it's coming, and that's good. That means we're used to it. And you'll even get to the place where you just do this, where you're holding your shoulders and you do it. That happens with me. How did that feel, Martha?
It really good. I felt the shift. I did yawn. I feel really chill right now. Of course, just talking to you, I always feel so good. So, and
Oh, that's good.
I want to just thank you also for the opportunity to be here to talk about functional freeze. I hope we help
Oh,
a few.
yes.
I hope we help at least a handful of people.
Oh, absolutely. I know, what a blessing and a privilege. We want to take our experience, wisdom, and help others. That's what we want, Martha. And that's one of the beautiful things about you. So I really, really appreciate you being here today with me, to explain and break down and take us to school on functional freeze. I love the way you explain and break the information down to to a place and in a way that's easy to understand
Thank
and
you.
also so relatable too. We have to be relatable. I mean, I've known some pretty intelligent, genius health professionals. They were not relatable, and it can be very off-putting. And you're very intelligent, but also relatable, Martha. So thank you, and you bring that measure of compassion to this as well. That's adds that depth and layer that we need. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So it wraps up today's episode. We learned what functional freeze is. Martha took us to school on how she overcame it, what it's all about, how she empowered herself with knowledge that she put in the research and effort, and as well as finding a doctor and relying on God. And then her determination and perseverance, along with her tools, helped her come out of this state and move forward. Next episode will be part 2, and we'll go into depth of dorsal vagal shutdown and what we can do to come out of it, which is very similar. Always remember the journey of emotional mastery is just that, a journey. And by understanding the science of our brains and implementing these tools, we can navigate our emotions with grace and resilience. If you find you need more support or one-on-one coaching, please visit my website and fill out the contact info at heathermhewitt.com. And if you found this episode enlightening, please share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe for more insights on your mental well-being. Remember to embrace the change and discover the beauty of transformation. Embrace your inner butterfly. Bye for now.